In the grand tapestry of human history, there are moments that echo through time. Words spoken that change the course of civilizations, ideas that reshape how we see ourselves and the world around us. One such moment happened on a mountainside in ancient Galilee. It was not a speech for kings or generals in a grand palace. It was a message for ordinary people. Fishermen, farmers, simple folks gathered on a grassy slope. They came to hear a young teacher named Jesus. His words would become known as the Sermon on the Mount, a collection of teachings that have fascinated, challenged, and inspired humanity for over 2,000 years. What exactly is this famous sermon? It's not a single story with a beginning and an end. Instead, it is a profound collection of wisdom. It is found in the Christian Bible in the book of Matthew. Chapters 5, 6, and 7 contain these powerful teachings. Jesus speaks about happiness, about justice, and about love. He offers a radical new way to look at life and faith. He paints a picture of a different kind of kingdom, one not built on power or wealth, but on humility and compassion. This sermon serves as a moral and spiritual compass for billions of people around the globe, a guide for living a life of meaning. Imagine the scene: a gentle hill overlooking the Sea of Galilee. The warm Middle Eastern sun shines down. A crowd begins to form, drawn by stories of this remarkable man. They are people from all walks of life, each carrying their own hopes and struggles. They are looking for something more, a sense of direction in a difficult world. Jesus sees this vast crowd gathering below him. He climbs a little higher up the mountain, finds a place to sit, and his disciples come close. Then, he opens his mouth and begins to speak, not with a roar, but with a voice of quiet authority that carries across the hillside. This was no ordinary lecture. The setting itself was significant. Mountains in the ancient world were often seen as places of divine revelation. They were places where heaven and earth seemed to meet. Moses received the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. Elijah heard the still, small voice of God on Mount Horeb. So, when Jesus went up the mountain to teach, the people would have understood the importance of the moment. They were not just listening to a wise man. They were witnessing what they believed to be a profound encounter with the divine, a new law being given not on stone tablets, but written on the human heart. The Sermon on the Mount is often called the constitution of the Christian faith. It lays out the core principles for how to live as a follower of Jesus. But its influence extends far beyond the walls of any church. Leaders and thinkers from all backgrounds have been moved by its message. Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr. found inspiration in its call for nonviolence and love for one's enemies. The teachings resonate with a universal human longing for peace and justice. They speak to the best parts of our nature, challenging us to be better than we are, to strive for a higher standard of living with one another. This collection of teachings is more than just a set of rules to follow. It is a bold vision for a new kind of society. Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven, but he describes it in surprising ways. Poor in spirit are blessed, those who mourn are comforted, the meek inherit the earth. This was a radical, upside-down way of thinking in a world dominated by Roman power and rigid social hierarchies. Jesus was presenting a reality where God's values were completely different from the world's values, a kingdom available to everyone, right here and right now. As we journey through this sermon, we will explore its most famous passages. We will unpack the Beatitudes, those beautiful blessings that open the speech, salt of the earth, the light of the world. We will examine his teachings on anger, lust, the importance of keeping one's word. He takes old laws and deepens their meaning, pushing his listeners to look beyond outward actions and examine the intentions of their hearts. It is a deep and challenging exploration of what it truly means to be good. This is not just a study of an ancient text, it is an invitation to listen with fresh ears to words that have shaped history. We will use stunning visuals and clear narration to bring this sermon to life. We will explore the context, the meaning, the enduring relevance of these teachings. Why does a speech given on a remote hillside 2 millennia ago still have the power to captivate and transform us today? Join us as we unlock the secrets of the Sermon on the Mount, one of the most powerful and beautiful speeches ever delivered. To truly understand the Sermon on the Mount, we must first travel back in time. We must journey to the land where it all took place. This is the region of Galilee, in the northern part of ancient Israel. It was a land of rolling hills and fertile valleys, a place of stunning natural beauty. The magnificent Sea of Galilee, a vast freshwater lake, sits at its heart. This lake was the lifeblood of the region. Its shores were dotted with fishing villages and bustling towns. The landscape was a patchwork of green fields, vineyards, olive groves, all basking under the warm Mediterranean sun. This was the world Jesus knew. It was the backdrop for his life and ministry. Life in first-century Galilee was simple yet demanding. Most people were farmers, fishermen, craftsmen. They worked the land with their hands, casting nets into the sea, tilling the soil from sunrise to sunset. Their lives were tied to the seasons and the rhythm of nature. It was a world without modern technology, where news traveled by word of mouth and the community was the center of social life. Families were large. People lived in modest homes made of stone and mud brick. Their existence was often a struggle, but it was also filled with a deep sense of tradition and faith, passed down through generations. The region was a crossroads of cultures. While it was deeply rooted in Jewish tradition, it was also under the firm control of the Roman Empire. Roman soldiers patrolled the roads, and Roman architecture could be seen in the larger cities. Greek was a common language of trade and government, spoken alongside the local Aramaic tongue. This created a complex and sometimes tense environment. The people of Galilee felt the weight of foreign occupation. They paid heavy taxes to a distant emperor and longed for the freedom and dignity promised in their sacred scriptures. This mix of cultures and political tension shaped the hopes and fears of everyone who lived there. This setting is more than just a historical backdrop. It is essential to the story. Jesus' teachings were not delivered in an abstract vacuum. They were spoken to real people, living in these specific circumstances. He used images and metaphors that everyone would understand. He spoke of planting seeds, of mending nets, of building houses on rock versus sand. He knew their daily struggles, their economic hardships, and their deep spiritual yearning. The fertile land of Galilee, with its beauty and its challenges, was the very soil in which the seeds of his message would first take root, promising a harvest of hope for a world in need. The people who gathered to hear Jesus were not a blank slate. The people who gathered to hear Jesus were not a blank slate. They were the heirs to a rich and ancient spiritual heritage. For centuries, the Jewish people had been waiting. They were waiting for a savior. They were waiting for a Messiah. This figure was foretold by their prophets. He would be a great leader, sent by God to deliver Israel from its oppressors, and establish a new kingdom of justice and peace. This hope was a powerful force in their society. It burned brightly in their hearts, especially during times of hardship and foreign rule. Every strange sign, every charismatic new teacher, was viewed through the lens of this profound expectation. The news about Jesus of Nazareth spread like wildfire through the towns and villages of Galilee. Stories were told of his remarkable teachings and miraculous deeds. People spoke of how he had healed the sick with a simple touch, or a word. They whispered about how he had cast out demons, and even calmed a storm on the sea. These were first-hand accounts from people whose lives had been changed. Fishermen left their nets, tax collectors abandoned their booths, farmers left their fields. They were all drawn by an irresistible curiosity and a deep-seated hope that something truly momentous was happening in their midst. The crowd that gathered on that mountainside was a true reflection of Galilean society. It was a diverse multitude of men, women, and children. There were weary fishermen whose hands were rough from hauling nets. There were farmers whose faces were weathered by the sun. There were mothers holding their children, hoping for a blessing or a word of comfort. There were also the outcasts, the poor, the sick, and those considered sinners by the religious establishment. For them, Jesus represented a radical message of inclusion. He ate with them, spoke to them, and treated them with a dignity they rarely received from others. Why did they come? Each person in that crowd carried their own burden and their own dream. Some came seeking physical healing for themselves or a loved one. They had heard that this man had the power to make the lame walk and the blind see. Others came with hungry souls, searching for spiritual guidance and answers to life's deepest questions. They felt let down by the rigid rules of the religious leaders and longed for a more direct, personal connection with God. And many came with a political hope, wondering if this powerful new voice might be the leader who would finally free them from the iron fist of Rome. As Jesus looked out over the sea of faces, he did not see a faceless mob. He saw individuals. He saw their suffering, their confusion, their longing, and their flickering faith. He understood the weight of their lives under Roman rule and the burden of religious expectations. He knew that simple platitudes would not be enough. They needed more than just another sermon. They needed a new vision for life, a new source of hope that could sustain them through their struggles. And so, as the crowd fell silent with anticipation, he began to speak the words that would change the world forever, offering them not what they expected, but what they truly needed. Jesus looked upon the crowd and with a calm and powerful voice, he began to speak. The words that came first were not a call to arms or a list of strict new rules. They were a series of blessings, a poem of hope. These are known as the Beatitudes, a word that simply means supreme blessedness or profound happiness. But the people Jesus called blessed were not the ones the world would have chosen. He didn't point to the rich, the powerful, or the successful. He pointed to the poor, the grieving, and the hungry. He was turning the world's idea of success completely upside down. It was a radical, revolutionary way to begin a sermon. He started with, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." This was not about being financially poor, though many in the crowd were. It was about a state of the heart. To be poor in spirit means to recognize your own spiritual bankruptcy. It is to know that you do not have all the answers, that you cannot save yourself. It is an admission of need, a profound humility before God. In a world that valued self-sufficiency and pride, Jesus declared that the starting point for true happiness was acknowledging your own emptiness. He promised that those who did would receive the greatest treasure of all, the kingdom of heaven itself. This idea of an upside-down kingdom was central to his message. The values of heaven were the complete opposite of the values of the Roman Empire, and even different from what some religious leaders taught. Power, wealth, and status meant nothing in this new reality Jesus was describing. Instead, humility, mercy, and a hunger for justice were the things that truly mattered. Each beatitude builds upon this theme, painting a picture of a world where God favors the overlooked and lifts up the lowly. Jesus was telling the crowd that their struggles, their pain, their feelings of insignificance did not disqualify them from God's blessing. In fact, it was the very thing that made them ready to receive it. The people listening on that hillside must have been stunned. The fishermen, the farmers, the sick, the marginalized. These were the ones Jesus called blessed. He was speaking directly to their experience. He saw their poverty, their grief, and their longing, and he did not offer them pity. He offered them honor. He was telling them that in God's eyes their current state was not a curse, but a qualification. This was not a distant promise for a far-off afterlife. Jesus used the present tense. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. He was announcing that this new reality, this upside-down kingdom, was available to them right then and there at that very moment. Jesus continued his series of surprising blessings, speaking directly to the wounded hearts in the crowd. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. In every life, there is loss, there is grief. The people before him knew this all too well. They mourned the death of loved ones, the loss of their national freedom, the personal pain of their own mistakes. Society often tells us to hide our grief, to be strong and move on. But Jesus did not tell them to stop mourning. He stepped into their sorrow and called them blessed right in the middle of it. He offered a profound promise. Their pain was not meaningless, and it would not last forever. This comfort he promised was more than just a pat on the back. It was a deep, divine solace. A healing that could mend the most broken parts of the human spirit. For a people feeling the weight of occupation and personal hardship, this was a powerful message of hope. It suggested that God was not distant or indifferent to their suffering. Instead, God was intimately present with them in their grief. This blessing gave dignity to their tears. It assured them that their sorrow had been seen, and that a time of true and lasting comfort was coming. It was a promise that even in the darkest valleys of life, they were not walking alone. Next, Jesus declared, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." The word meek is often misunderstood today. It does not mean weak, timid, or being a doormat. In the original language, it carried the idea of power under control. It describes a person who is gentle, humble, and patient, even when they have the ability to be otherwise. Think of a powerful war horse that is perfectly trained and gentle with its rider. The meek are those who do not use force or aggression to get their way. They trust in God's strength rather than their own. They don't need to fight and claw for their piece of the world. This promise, that the meek would inherit the earth, must have sounded incredible. The world they knew belonged to the powerful, to Caesar and his legions who took what they wanted by force. Jesus was proposing a future where the entire world would be given to the gentle and the humble. He was flipping the script on power itself. True lasting inheritance would not come through the sword, but through a quiet strength and a steady trust in God's plan. He was teaching that the future of the world belonged not to the arrogant and the violent, but to those with a gentle and surrendered spirit. It was a radical redefinition of both power and victory. The Beatitudes then shift from our inner state to our outward actions. Jesus proclaimed, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." This is a powerful image everyone in the crowd would understand. Hunger and thirst are not casual desires, they are deep, driving needs. Jesus meant a passion for justice and goodness just as intense. It is a desperate longing to see the world set right. Fairness for the poor, freedom for the oppressed, integrity in all things. A soul-deep craving for God's will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. For people under an unjust system, this blessing was a fire. It affirmed their deep desire for a better world. Jesus wasn't telling them to passively accept injustice. He blessed their hunger for something more. He blessed their righteous anger at the way things were. And the promise was absolute. They will be filled. Their spiritual and moral hunger would be completely satisfied. God would not ignore their cries for justice. A day was coming when righteousness would flow like a river. Everyone who longed for it would be utterly fulfilled. A promise of ultimate satisfaction for the deepest human desires. Jesus then moved to the core of human relationships. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Mercy is more than feeling sorry for someone. It is actively showing compassion and forgiveness, especially to those who do not deserve it, canceling a debt, letting go of a grudge, helping someone who has wronged you. Our experience of God's mercy is linked to our willingness to show mercy. The mercy we give away is the mercy we get to keep. Build a community based on grace, not on keeping score. Finally, Jesus looked at the center of a person's being. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Purity of heart isn't perfection or never making a mistake. It's undivided devotion to God. It's integrity, inner self matching outer actions, not cluttered with mixed motives, not filled with deceit, not a love of worldly things, single-minded in its desire for God. The promise, the ability to see God, not just to know about God but to experience God's presence directly and personally, the ultimate goal, the highest blessing imaginable. After laying the foundation with the Beatitudes, Jesus shifts his focus. He turns from describing the character of his followers to defining their purpose in the world. He uses two simple, powerful metaphors, salt and light. You are the salt of the earth, he tells them. In the ancient world, salt was incredibly valuable. It was used for flavoring food. It was used for preserving food, preventing decay. It was also used in religious ceremonies as a symbol of purity and commitment. Salt was an active agent of change. It made a noticeable difference wherever it was applied. By calling his followers salt, Jesus was giving them a profound mission. They were not meant to withdraw from the world into isolated holy communities. They were meant to be sprinkled throughout society, just as salt is mixed into food. Their purpose was to be a preserving influence, to stop the moral and spiritual decay around them, to bring out the good flavor of humanity, to enhance life and to challenge corruption and injustice. But he also gives a stern warning. But if the salt loses its saltiness, he asks, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything, except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. This was a serious challenge. A follower of Jesus who loses their distinct positive influence becomes useless. If they simply blend in with the world and adopt its corrupt values, they fail in their primary function. Their faith becomes tasteless and without purpose. Jesus is saying that their identity must be potent and unmistakable. They must actively work to preserve goodness and add value to the world around them. It is a call to live a life of noticeable integrity and positive impact. A life that, like salt, makes everything it touches just a little bit better, a little more pure. Then Jesus adds another layer to this mission. You are the light of the world, he declares. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. The crowd could likely see small towns perched on the surrounding Galilean hills as he spoke. At night, the light from their lamps would be visible for miles. The image was clear. Their lives were meant to be visible. They were not to hide their faith or their good deeds. Just as a lamp is not lit to be put under a bowl, but on a stand to give light to everyone in the house, their lives were meant to shine. Their purpose was to illuminate the darkness, to guide others, and to reveal the character of God to a world lost in shadow. Next, Jesus addresses a concern that must have been on many people's minds. With all this talk of a new kingdom and new blessings, Was he trying to abolish their sacred traditions? Was he throwing away the law of Moses, the very foundation of their faith? He answers directly and emphatically. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets, he says. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. This would have been a comforting yet deeply intriguing statement. He wasn't discarding their history, he was completing it. He was revealing its ultimate meaning and deepest purpose. He then makes a stunning claim about the standard of goodness required in his kingdom. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. This must have shocked his listeners. The Pharisees were the most respected religious models of the day. They were famous for their meticulous, detailed observance of every single rule in the law. To suggest that one needed to be even more righteous than them seemed impossible. How could anyone possibly achieve that? But Jesus was not talking about following more rules, he was talking about going deeper. He begins to give a series of examples, starting with the commandment, "You shall not murder." The religious teachers focused on the external act of killing. As long as you didn't physically harm someone, you had kept the law. But Jesus pushes past the action to the attitude of the heart. He says that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister, or who insults them, is subject to the same judgment. He was teaching that the anger in your heart is the seed of murder. The hateful word on your lips comes from the same dark place. He was moving the focus from outward behavior to inward motivation. God, he explained, is not just concerned with what we do, but with who we are. It's not enough to simply avoid committing adultery. Jesus says that anyone who even looks at someone with lust in their heart has already committed the act internally. He wasn't creating new, impossible rules. He was revealing the true spirit of the original law. He was calling his followers to a righteousness that was not about public performance or rule-keeping, but about a genuine transformation of the heart, where even their hidden thoughts and deepest feelings begin to align with the goodness of God. Jesus continues to push his listeners beyond the conventional wisdom of their day, moving to one of his most challenging and famous teachings. He addresses the old principle of an eye for an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This law was originally meant to limit vengeance, to ensure that the punishment fit the crime and did not spiral into endless cycles of retaliation. It was a principle of measured justice. But Jesus offers a completely different path. He says, "But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also." This was honestly a radical departure from human instinct. Turning the other cheek is not a sign of weakness or cowardice. In that culture, a slap on the right cheek was a backhanded gesture, an act of profound insult meant to shame and humiliate someone of lower status. To turn the other cheek was a defiant, non-violent act of courage. It was a way of saying, "You cannot dehumanize me. I refuse to play your game of power and shame. I am a child of God, and I will not retaliate in kind." Jesus was teaching his followers to break the cycle of violence and insult with surprising, disarming acts of peace. He then takes this principle to its ultimate conclusion. He quotes the common understanding, "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy.'" While the Old Testament commanded love for one's neighbor, the hatred of enemies was a widely accepted cultural norm, especially toward the Roman occupiers. But Jesus delivers the most revolutionary command in the entire sermon. "But I tell you," he says, with profound authority, "love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." This was not just a suggestion, it was a command to extend the most powerful force in the universe, love, to the very people who wish you harm. Why would he command such a difficult thing? Jesus provides the reason immediately. He says we should do this so that we may be children of our Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. God's love, his basic grace and provision, is not conditional. It is given freely to everyone, friend and foe alike. To love our enemies is to imitate the very character of God. It is the ultimate sign that we are truly part of his family. It proves that our love is not just a transaction but a reflection of the divine, unconditional love that has been shown to us. After challenging his listeners to a righteousness of the heart, Jesus turns to the practical matter of religious devotion. He addresses the common practices of giving to the needy, praying, fasting. He warns against doing these good deeds for public applause. He speaks of the hypocrites who love to pray loudly on street corners so that everyone can see how pious they are. Jesus is clear. When you make a public spectacle of your faith, the admiration you receive from others is the only reward you will ever get. He urges his followers to find a different motivation. one rooted in a genuine relationship with God, not in the pursuit of public honor. He then offers a beautiful and simple model for prayer. It's not meant to be a magic formula or a rigid script to be repeated mindlessly. Instead, it's a template, a guide for how to approach God. This prayer has become known to the world as the Lord's Prayer, our Father in heaven. Not a distant, unapproachable king, but a loving, personal Father. It establishes trust and family before requests are made, honoring God, His name to be holy, His kingdom to come to earth. The prayer then moves to our human needs. Jesus teaches His followers to ask for our daily bread. This is a humble request for simple, sufficient provision for today. It's an expression of dependence, trusting God to supply what is needed for this day only, not hoarding for the future. Then comes a crucial connection. And forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. Here, Jesus links receiving God's forgiveness directly to our willingness to forgive others. It echoes His earlier teaching on mercy. We cannot expect grace from God if we are unwilling to extend it to those who have wronged us. The prayer concludes with a plea for spiritual protection, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. This is an admission of our own moral frailty. It is a humble request for God's guidance to help us navigate the trials of life and to protect us from the forces of evil that seek to pull us down. In just a few short lines, this prayer covers worship, submission to God's will, dependence for daily needs, the critical importance of forgiveness, and the need for spiritual guidance and protection. It is a profound and complete model for how to talk to God with honesty and humility. From the intimacy of prayer, Jesus expands His teaching to address one of the most common human struggles, anxiety. He tells the crowd, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear." This must have sounded impossible to people who lived a hand-to-mouth existence, where the next meal was never guaranteed. But Jesus points them to the natural world for reassurance. "Look at the birds," He says. "They don't plant or harvest or store food in barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they?" He then points to the wildflowers growing on the hillsides around them. "See how the flowers of the field grow," He says. "They do not labor or spin. Not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these." The logic is simple and beautiful. If God takes such extravagant care of birds and flowers, things that are temporary and fleeting, how much more will He care for His own beloved children? Worry, Jesus explains, is ultimately useless. It cannot add a single hour to our lives. Instead, it distracts us from what truly matters. It demonstrates a lack of trust in our Heavenly Father's love and provision. The antidote to worry, Jesus says, is to reorder our priorities. "But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness," He commands. His will, His justice, His way of life. And all these things will be given to you as well. This is the heart of the matter. Instead of making our material needs the central focus of our lives, we are to focus on God's kingdom, His will, His justice, His way of life. When we put God first, everything else falls into its proper place. This is not a promise of wealth, but a promise of sufficiency. It's an assurance that if we focus on what is eternally important, God will take care of our earthly needs. Jesus concludes His long sermon with a final, powerful metaphor that summarizes everything He has taught. He speaks of two builders. One is wise and builds his house on solid rock. The other is foolish and builds his house on sand. When the storms of life come, the rains, the floods, the winds, the house on the rock stands firm. The house on the sand, however, collapses with a great crash. The foundation, Jesus explains, is hearing His words and putting them into practice. Hearing the sermon is not enough. True wisdom and a strong life are built by actively living out these teachings, by being merciful, by loving enemies, by trusting God, and by seeking His kingdom above all else. As the final words of His sermon faded, a stillness settled over the Galilean hillside. The crowd was left in awe. They were astonished. He taught with authority, not like their usual teachers of the law. He had not just given them a list of rules, a new way of seeing the world, a new way of being human, a kingdom governed by love, mercy, radical trust in a heavenly Father. This was more than just a speech, a manifesto for a transformed life, a blueprint for a world remade. The echo of that voice on the mountain has never truly gone silent. For over 2,000 years these words have continued to challenge and inspire humanity. Young activist, an elderly woman smiling, a doctor in scrubs, a construction worker. The Sermon on the Mount has become one of the most influential texts in history. Its teachings have shaped laws, ethics, the moral fabric of civilizations across the globe. But its true power is found in the quiet transformation of individual hearts, the addict seeking a new beginning, the soldier wrestling with conscience, the community leader fighting for justice, the parent teaching a child what it means to be good. Its message is timeless because human struggles are universal. How can we find true happiness? How should we respond to injustice and conflict? Is it possible to love our enemies? How do we deal with anxiety about the future? What is the foundation of a meaningful life? The Sermon on the Mount does not offer easy answers. It offers a difficult but beautiful path. It calls us to a higher standard, to look beyond selfish instincts, to live for something greater than ourselves. Humility, mercy, love, the only life worth living. This sermon has inspired people of all faiths and none. Mahatma Gandhi said it was essential to his philosophy of nonviolent resistance. Teachings on turning the other cheek, loving one's enemies. Martin Luther King Jr. built his movement on its principles, calling for a love powerful enough to break down segregation and hate. It speaks to the deepest aspirations for peace, justice, reconciliation. The final image Jesus left with the crowd was that of the two houses, one built on the shifting sands of popular opinion and fleeting desires, the other built on the solid rock of his teachings. This metaphor is perhaps more relevant today than ever before. We live in a world of constant change, a storm of information, shifting cultural values. It is easy to build our lives on the sand, the pursuit of wealth, fame, the approval of others. But as Jesus warned, when the storms of life inevitably come, sickness, loss, disappointment, a life built on such a flimsy foundation will collapse. The Sermon on the Mount offers us an alternative. It offers us solid rock. It calls us to build our lives on principles that do not change: integrity, compassion, forgiveness, a deep trust in God. To build on this rock means to actively put these teachings into practice. It means choosing mercy when we want revenge. It means seeking justice for the oppressed even when it is inconvenient. It means praying for those who hurt us. It means trusting in God's provision instead of being consumed by worry. Each of these choices is like laying another stone on a firm foundation, creating a life that has the strength to withstand any storm. This is not a path to an easy life, but to a strong one. Jesus never promised that following him would mean an absence of trouble. The rain, the floods, the winds beat down on both houses. The difference was not in the storm, but in the foundation. A life built on the principles of the Sermon on the Mount may still face hardship, but it will not be destroyed by it. There is a strength, a resilience, a profound peace that comes from knowing your life is anchored to something true and eternal. It is a house that stands, not because of its own power, but because of the rock on which it is built. Ultimately, the Sermon on the Mount is an open invitation. It is a call from a voice on a distant hillside that still reaches us today. It invites us to examine our hearts, to reconsider our priorities, to imagine a better way to live with one another. It is a bold and beautiful vision of a world where the meek inherit the earth, the merciful are shown mercy. It is a promise that by seeking God's kingdom first, we can find a life of purpose, strength, enduring hope. The sermon is not just an ancient text to be studied, it is a path to be walked, a foundation to be built upon, one choice at a time.